Hello, lovelies. Gosh, well, there might be some strange noises on this podcast as I am kind of sitting in the jungle right now. Big changes here for Chance and I. I might get into that on another podcast. But just for now, know that there's crazy ass frogs and cicadas and geckos making all kinds of noises out there. But I've missed you, and I've missed Schwaller as well. So I'm going to jump back into some Schwaller today, and it's going to seem like, well, to me it seems like I probably should have done this podcast first. But a friend of mine on Facebook posted the most wonderful quote, and it spoke to me very deeply, considering that we're in the symbolist line of business. And it was a quote from Manly P. Hall. And the quote was, "When the human race learns to read the language of symbolism, a great veil will fall from the eyes of men." And that really struck me quite deeply, particularly reading Schwaller, right? And I'm going to read you a little bit more of Schwaller later, and you will see why. But let me continue a little bit more with Manly for a minute. And I think this will clarify the importance of that statement. Symbolism is the language of the mysteries. In fact, it is the language not only of mysticism and philosophy, but of all nature. For every law and power active in the universal procedure is manifested to the limited sense perception of man through the medium of symbol. Let me read that again. For every law and power active in the universal procedure is manifested to the limited sense perceptions of man through the medium of symbol. He goes on. Every form existing in the diversified sphere of being is symbolic of the divine activity by which it is produced. That is a very Egyptian perspective. I wonder if Manly read Schwaller, perhaps. I don't know. By symbols, men have ever sought to communicate to each other those thoughts which transcend the limitations of language. Rejecting man-conceived dialects as inadequate and unworthy to perpetuate divine ideas. The mysteries thus chose symbolism as a far more ingenious and ideal method of preserving their transcendental knowledge. In a single figure, a symbol may both reveal and conceal. For to the wise, the subject of the symbol is obvious, while to the ignorant, the figure remains inscrutable. Hence, he who seeks to unveil the secret doctrine of antiquity must search for that doctrine not upon the open pages of books, which might fall into the hands of the unworthy, but in the place where it was originally concealed. Bam, right? Wow, yeah, okay, let's keep going. Far-sighted were the initiates of antiquity. They realized that nations come and go, that empires rise and fall, and that the golden ages of art, science, and idealism are succeeded by the dark ages of superstition. With the needs of posterity foremost in mind, the sages of old went to inconceivable extremes to make certain that their knowledge should be preserved. They engraved it upon the face of mountains and concealed it within the measurements of colossal images, each of which was a geometric marvel. Christopher Dunn speaks to that. Their knowledge of chemistry and mathematics they hid within mythologies, which the ignorant would perpetuate, or in the spans and arches of their temples, which time has not entirely obliterated. They wrote in characters that neither the vandalism of men nor the ruthlessness of the elements could completely efface. Today, men gaze with awe and reverence upon the mighty minims standing alone on the sands of Egypt. Mute testimonies these are of the lost arts and sciences of antiquity, and concealed this wisdom must remain until this race has learned to read the universal language of symbolism. Now, this made me think, right, that we are really just starting to do that again. So we have Schwaller de Lubicz in 1937 studying the Luxor temple, which was less than 100 years ago. And to my knowledge, I don't know, there might have been somebody before, but for my money anyway, Schwaller really opened the door to pharaonic thinking, which is essentially symbolist thinking. And then came John, and it doesn't surprise me at all then that Chance, Brad, and Gary's new symbolic discoveries are seen by some as Jesus in toast. I don't know how many times does Jesus have to be in toast for it not to be a Jesus in toast, but you can see that this ability to read the language of symbolism, it is helping us to have a great veil fall from our eyes, right? We are seeing now in the symbolism of ancient Egypt that the ancients had a pretty sophisticated model of consciousness. And speaking of Schwaller, let me read you a little bit more about what Schwaller has to say about symbols. Actually, Schwaller has a book called Symbol and Symbolique. And honestly, I'm tossing up whether I should go through several of his little books because each of them have absolute gems. And it appears to me that you're enjoying this little Schwaller journey. And I must admit that Schwaller is a fairly substantial undertaking. So by having me go through it with you, I'm hoping that it is making it a little bit more accessible. And I must admit that I've had these books on my shelf for 20 years. And it's literally only this year that it's starting to become digestible to me. So we'll keep going with Schwaller until you get bored. But there is a lot of juicy material on the table. So let's see what Schwaller says about the idea of symbol. Schwaller says that excavations and philological studies supply the Egyptologist with abundant material for a knowledge of the life, beliefs, and theology of ancient Egypt. An encyclopedic amount of work is available to the researcher. Nevertheless, pharaonic Egypt remains unknown in terms of its true science, its contingent psycho-spiritual knowledge, and its philosophical mentality. Now, to be honest with you, those three things, the psycho-spiritual knowledge and its philosophical mentality, and of course, its true science, are the things that I find most interesting about ancient Egypt. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love the temples and the pyramids and the land itself, but the thing that continues to hold my fascination is this aspect of ancient Egypt. And quite frankly, I think there's so much for us to learn from it. Back to Schwaller. The funerary text developed the myth transcribed into images, but it has not been possible to translate the deeper meaning of these images into comprehensible language. The philosophical connection of the accumulated data is lacking. One tends to seek in ancient Egypt, as well as in Babylon and other traditions of the past, what might be called a rational expression of esotericism. This is an error that arises from the prejudice that there is no esotericism, or that there exists an intent to conceal a certain knowledge. Again, this expression of a rational expression of esotericism is a materialist bent, right? And that is one of the big problems we're still grappling with today, 100 years later. So we, all of us here on this podcast and listening to it, I'm sure we're aware that there is actually an esotericism in ancient Egypt. And as Schwaller explained last time, and as Manley hinted at, it's not necessarily their intent to conceal it, but to make it available for those that have eyes to see. Okay, let's continue. However, simple reasoning shows us that, for example, if the Gospels were written to teach the way of truth and to show us what truth consists of, then the form of parables and enigmatic phrases chosen for this revelation would be nonsensical if its purpose were to conceal this truth. The purpose of these parables and enigmatic phrases is not to hide anything from he who has eyes to see and ears to hear. According to the evangelical formulas, the purpose is to select those who developed the necessary understanding and who are for this reason worthy of these secrets, that is to say, they will not misuse them for selfish motives. There was never any intent to conceal from those thus prepared any of the wisdom transmitted by texts, traditions, or monuments. The enigma does not lie in the thing itself, but is the result of our understanding, our faculties, and our intelligence, which are not attuned to the mentality according to which the idea was expressed. And it is just this that our present education prevents us from admitting. Now, I know I included that in another reading of Schwaller, but I think that it is worth expressing again. Because here again, he's pointing to the idea that this information is not hidden. And this is something, honestly, that I have to kind of fight with Chance a little bit about. But it's more because of our materialistic prison paradigm, our lack of acknowledgement of other realms beside the material, that this information is obscured. Schwaller goes on. However, there is a type of education using the vital organs in which the nervous flux is transformed as well as the centers or nodes of this flux can awaken consciousness of states that precede and transcend material forms. Now, that one sentence is really the crux of Chance's and Brad's and Gary's entire interest. And I guess this is why they're focusing so much on the vital organs in which the nervous flux is transformed and the centers and nodes of this flux, because they are fascinated by awakening this consciousness that precedes and transcends material forms. But Schwaller goes on to say the West has no terminology for this science, and thus we must have recourse to the Oriental languages. But the words alone are useless without the concept. Ancient Egypt is in fact one of the major sources of these sciences. However, a true vocabulary of the pharaonic language, or even a provisional one, will never be possible unless attention is given to those questions which we define as psycho-spiritual. The Egyptian symbolism can guide us in this regard and show us meanings other than the common meanings currently accepted for a great many words. In this way, the meaning of many texts will become clear. You know, one of the things about symbolism, and something that I've heard Chant say, is that every symbol has 7 or so levels of meaning, right? And so I can see that if that is true, and I haven't really researched that other than just hearing it and, accepting it because my husband said it, you can see how common meanings of current words can have deeper and deeper meanings. In fact, in the very, very first podcast here, I said we were going to be looking at even English words and revisiting their meaning for a deeper level of meaning. So that makes perfect sense to me. Schwaller goes on. Rationalism is based on the data provided by the senses, and the senses perceive only a meager part of what is. Thus, through rationalism alone, we can know only what is encountered through the senses, what is ponderable, quantitative. Yet mathematics have demonstrated the existence of elements that fall outside the physical. We must take this into account, and if rationalism brings us up against an impenetrable wall, in doing so, in fact, teaches us that it has limits and that we should seek another means of knowledge. We express ourselves in a conventional language, and the dictionary defines and limits the meaning of each word. Therefore, we can understand nothing beyond what the dictionary knows. We write with conventional alphabetic signs that in themselves express only sounds. Thus, our alphabet is merely a mechanical means for composing the words in the dictionary and transmitting the thoughts they encompass. It may be said that the combination of these letters are almost infinite. True, but the number of words is limited by notions already acquired. Thought can also examine observed phenomena and seek the causes. Certainly it can. But as soon as it approaches the metaphysical, it can no longer find in our language and forms of writing the means of expressing itself. Abstract ideas, formulated in words for which we lack the concepts, are objectified and lose their significance. Now, the whole idea of language is like a really huge subject, and there is a stream of thought that when we started actually speaking, we lost a lot of wisdom. And that even taking it a step further, taking it into written language, kind of reduced our scope of possibility again. And there's a great video. I'll see if I can find it. Gosh, it was a long time ago that I saw this. But the idea of like language and then written language were both steps towards cementing our paradigm, right? If there's not a word for it, how do you explain it? Like what? The Italians have 6 different words for love or something like that. And so you're able to understand the difference between brotherly love and romantic love, for example. But we have love in English. Or the Eskimos have, I don't know, again, 7 different words for ice. But we have 1 word for ice. And so you lose a lot of the definition when you are constrained by languages that don't have words for what you're trying to express. In fact, some might say that if there's not a word for it, it doesn't exist. Because how can you think of it? Particularly if you're of the materialistic mindset. So I think this is a very, very powerful idea. It follows from these observations that either there exists only a concrete world, perceptible to the senses, or we lack a faculty that would enable us to grasp the abstract without having to concretize through the imagination. The process is ingrained in us in accordance with a mode that always leads forward, the quantitative definitive. This is the inverse of the Egyptian mentality. If an unknown phenomena appears, it is already the concretization of a cause that was abstract for us. Instead of searching out the nature of this cause, we obey our reductionist tendency and restrict both cause and phenomena to the realm of the mechanical mentality. We investigate nothing deeply. We pull everything down to our own limits. However, a simple image proves to us that there is a way we can express ourselves without limiting a notion to a defined form. I'm just going to stop there for a second and just riff on this a little bit. I'm amazed looking through Facebook how everybody is a geopolitical war analyst and completely understands the war in Ukraine. And it is my experience that in life, nothing, not one thing is that simple, is that black and white. Literally trying to decide to go out to dinner, to a restaurant with your husband is full of so many incredible nuances. How do I feel? How does he feel? Am I hungry? Is he hungry? Would I rather rest first? What do I want to wear? Do I have to do my hair? Can we go somewhere where I can wear what I'm wearing? There's a million decisions that go into our dinner plans that nobody on the outside, not even us on the inside, can really fully understand the nuances of. And everybody on Facebook, not everybody, but like Facebook, understands with clarity all the subjects that come up, like the war or the COVID or whatever. I mean, it's just black and white, and yikes, it's not possible. It's simply not possible. And so I prefer to sit and wait and watch and see and learn and research and try to understand. And you might, friends of mine on Facebook, you probably hardly ever see me talk about these subjects because I don't feel like I have the knowledge, right? The deep knowledge of these subjects. And that's what Schwaller's talking about here, right? He says we investigate nothing deeply. We pull everything down to our own limits. Another boom, right? Okay, so that's not talking about the current news, but, he's talking about the philosophy and science of ancient Egypt. But that same thought applies here. Okay, so let's pick it up again. However, a simple image proves to us that there is a way we can express ourselves without limiting a notion to a defined form and transcribe our thought without imposing our own mentality on those who will read this image. We have gotten into the habit of reducing everything in time and space. This is the rational habit. An image, on the other hand, gives access to a world of qualities and functions. For instance, if we say a man walks, we see a man walking, but we see him in a limited way. We imagine only the fact of moving or walking. We can then place that fact in the past, present, or future, and all of the gradations of these tenses. We situate this movement in time and space. If, on the other hand, we see an image that represents a man walking, or simply lines depicting a man, we no longer imagine him. We no longer situate him. He is there. He is here. It is the function that interests us and the quality of that function. We can then paint this man green. It will no longer be solely the function of walking with one's legs that is evoked. The movement could also signify vegetation or growth. But to our reason, walking and growing are two different functions, while in reality there is an abstract connection between them. It is a movement outside consideration of time or pathway or specific direction. If we wish to define this movement, we immediately reduce it in time and space, whereas there is no further need to define the feeling or motion, whether walking or growing. The image, the symbol, acts as definition, and we can in fact experience this condition, unconsciously become one with it, without any reasoning, just as any child would looking at pictures. Thus, the representation, the symbol, is our only true means of transmitting an esoteric meaning, which, in alphabetic writing, we have to seek in parable, or possibly metaphor or allegory. Symbolic representation and imagistic writing are the pure, hieratic forms of esoteric expression. Through symbolism and through it alone, we can read the thought of the ancients. It is only through the symbolical that we will be able to coordinate the known elements of this great civilization, and that the writing may take on its true meaning. We are dealing here not with an evolution of science, but rather, on the contrary, with an immutable basis for the existence of a language and a form of writing that were already complete from the time of the earliest dynasties of the historic period seems to confirm this. What we see is not the beginning of research, but the application of a knowledge already possessed. Whew! And that is really what John was about, right? So in this one little article by Schwaller, we found John Home, Chance Home, Gary and Brett Home, and Vanessa Home. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? How we've all taken this work and spread out into different areas of fascination. But I think that's what ancient Egypt really is about. You know, Chance has this thing that ancient Egypt is like a secret book, and it doesn't matter what your specialty, whether you're a dentist or an artist or a dancer or a painter or a mathematician or a gardener, you will find some incredibly powerful and esoteric wisdom in ancient Egypt. And because of Chance and Brad's specialty in art, they happened, and their interest in consciousness, guess what they found in ancient Egypt? Consciousness expressed in the art. Very, very cool stuff. Well, I hope you enjoyed this one, my lovelies, and I think that I have settled now, so these should in fact once again become more regular. There will be no more moving for at least a year now. Too many moves, but this one I'm very happy about. Thank you for listening, lovelies, and again I apologize for the big delay, but more soon.